Hello and welcome to this edition of our series of interviews on authors for the New Zealand Journal of Health and Safety Practice. And joining us today, we have my co-host from the Circus of Safety, Andy. How are you doing?
Doing very well, thanks, Des. How are you?
Good, thank you. And special guest, Dr. Chris Peace, joining us. How are you, Chris?
Good, thank you. Skip the doctor bit, just call me Chris.
Excellent, thank you very much. So, Chris, we've set up today's interview in relation to an article that you wrote about writing articles, and I'm keen to understand. Can you share what inspired you to write this article and writing articles of interest for practitioners?
Yeah, in 2024, I was trying to pull together an edition of the journal, which was it was really about 50 years since the British Health and Safety at Work Act had come into force, and how that had come to influence our legislation in New Zealand, the significance of that 50-year period. And I went round shoulder tapping a few people and said, well, I know you've presented something at a conference, or you've been in this game for a long time, not for perhaps 30 or 40 years. Could you write something about what you think is the significance? And several of the prospective authors, a couple of them said, no, I don't know how to write. Well, how on earth do you make a living if you can't write? But that was another story. A number of them said, yeah, but I don't know where to start. How do you mean? Well, I don't know how to start writing an article that's academic and for a journal. And I thought, well, yeah, I know. I'd written, on the face of it, I'd written a couple of things that got published in Safeguard magazine. And Peter Bateman, who is, I think, a champion sort of person, he would take what I'd written and turn it into the style that he wanted it to be for Safeguard magazine. And I thought, well, yeah, here am I as having been told that I was going to have to be the chief editor, and I'm now trying to explain to people, how do you start writing an article that is going to go into an academic journal, even if it's a journal about health and safety practice? So we're not aiming for, I don't know if you know, there's the British journal Nature. There's in fact a whole series of journals that are about nature. If you get published in one of those journals, you've made it. That's your career. You've been published in something that's absolute world class. We're never going to be in that space with our journal. It's about practice in New Zealand and elsewhere. So how do you get people to write about practice? And I helped people through with that particular edition. I gave them backroom advice, and in some cases, they'd tell me, well, I want to cite this particular document or a report, and can you help me? And so they'd given me the text that they wanted to submit, and then I had to insert the in-text citations and the bibliography at the end so that it looked somewhat like an academic article. And it worked. I sent them off for anonymous review, and the reviewers generally came back and said, that's fine. And after it was all over, that edition, I thought, hell's bells, this is not going to be the only time. There will be so many people who've got a story to tell. One of the types of article that we're interested in is a case study. And I remembered, because I hadn't long since done an online chat with some occupational health nurses, and as I arrived to do my bit, I listened to a couple of OC health nurses talking about and I'm sorry if this causes disquiet and consternation for the two of you guys, but they were talking about the consequences for men who'd had prostate cancer and had the prostate gland removed surgically, and the impact it had on those men in all sorts of ways. And I said to them in my bit of the presentation, that would make it a really good article, because so many health and safety people just won't know that kind of thing. There'll be individual men who've gone through it. They don't understand. More of us don't understand. So I set to and thought, well, there must surely be an article that I can point at that's open access. It's not behind a paywall. And I couldn't find anything. So I found half a dozen sources that I thought were useful and sat down to write some guidance notes that I could give people. And that gradually turned into the article about writing an article of interest to practitioners. And having written it, I got one of my colleagues who I know has a sharp red pen to go through it, these comments. In some respects, it didn't get a proper external anonymous review, but I knew I could trust my colleague, and she didn't. Yeah, she knew what I wanted, so she gave me good criticism, and that's what became the journal article about writing an article. It's there. It's online, open access. Anybody can download it and read. That's how you start. Okay.
Fantastic. Oh, that's brilliant. So what would you consider the most common challenges that prospective authors face when sitting down to write an article?
Probably the same challenge that because with the students, the postgrad students I teach, in each of the papers, the fifth assignment, the final assignment, is to write something in the form of an academic article that you've been invited to submit to a journal somewhere on the other side of the planet about this subject. And I change the subject a little bit year on year. And every time I have to tell the students, and it's, I think, the same problem for any hoping to be an author. How do I start? Well, I'd better summarize everything I want to say. So they sit down and write the abstract. And I hammer it home with the students. Don't start with the abstract, because that's a summary of what you're going to write. You actually write the abstract, your summary, last of all. Oh, and how do I start then? Well, start with a problem. Why did you want to write this? What do you mean? Well, you want to write something about the history of the New Zealand Health and Safety at Work Act. Where did it come from? So where do you start with that? Oh, well, I suppose I might start with Pike River and all of the reports that followed Pike River. Yeah, okay, so that's where you start. Really? Yeah, and if you want, you can go back a bit further. There's an article written by Deanne Brabham that got published in 2024. You can read what she wrote about the history of the British Health and Safety at Work Act. Oh, right. So, and that's all made up on the spur of the moment just now. But somebody starts off with, oh dear, I'm trying to think of it. There was one article that unfortunately we didn't get to publish. What distance do nurses walk every day on a shift? Nurses in a hospital or a care home, how far do they walk? I don't know, must be a hell of a lot of walking. Yeah. And that particular piece of research that didn't make it into print with us showed that they were walking several kilometers, and how many steps they did, because they put a pedometer onto the nurses who they were working with. And so where do you start with writing up an article like that? We didn't know. You can say, well, at the point of starting the research, we didn't know how far people walk every day. And that reminded me of donkeys years ago, before I emigrated to New Zealand. A colleague, I was working in Bristol, in the city of Bristol, completely different sort of job, but I was enforcing the British Health and Safety at Work Act in non-industrial workplaces. And I was talking to a colleague in a different department who had to go out looking for work that needed to be done to repair pavements and the pavement that people walk on or the roads that people drive on. And he told me how many pairs of shoes he went through every year because of the distance he walked looking for the repair work. Now, technology has changed things, I know that. But that was then 40 odd years ago. And so where do you start? Well, here is this problem, this question. And I then did some work that answered the question. Good, good. And then I got some data. Yeah, okay, where did you get that from? Okay, I went and read some documents and perhaps I talked to some people and I interviewed them. Yes, that's right. And you gradually build the story of how you did a piece of applied research. And then you finish by saying things like, this research was self-funded, which is true for almost everything I've been doing. And that the other things you might want to say if I'm collaborating, as there's something I'm working on. One of my postgraduate students did some work on dust explosions and I'm rewriting it, but I would say that he did the applied research, I've done the writing. So that goes at the end. Having finished there, you go back and read the whole thing through and say, right, what are the key things that I'm going to put into the abstract? And that's how it's done. It sounds very easy to describe it like that. Sweaty.
It sounds so easy that you're inspiring me to write an article, Chris.
Good.
So just in my mind, I'm interested in the health and safety education pathways in New Zealand because my background is in teaching, and I've done research, just sort of back of the cigarette packet sort of research into looking at these different pathways, and I've just stopped it there. I use it a little bit with some of the teaching that I do with some of the diploma students that I teach, but I only teach to level 6, not to the extreme levels that you go to. And you know, because often at level 6 they say, we've really enjoyed this, where to next? And that's not easy. I mean, clearly it is if you're at Victoria University, but it's not easy to find a pathway. You know, there's so many different options, especially with international courses now easily available in New Zealand. So I think there's and it was actually mentioned in the task force report as well about developing a New Zealand education safety framework.
Yeah.
So that's been on the back burner for a number of years, but talking to you today, Chris, has reignited that fire. Oh no, it's the last thing I need. Cool. So anyway, along with that sort of line is when I've done research in the past, one of the things that became really apparent to me early on when doing the research papers was the importance of ethics and research ethics. And it is hugely significant. And people that haven't sort of delved in the academic world or done research probably don't fully understand the importance of ethics and the role that they play in the type of research that's being done. Could you just sort of give us a bit of an overview of how that would, you know, in your article, you talk a little bit about ethics. How would that be? You know, these people haven't done research papers, so how do you sort of get that knowledge to them?
In some respects, a heck of a lot of, if I talk about interviewers, if you want to interview somebody or if you wanted to run an online survey in the university, if I want to do either of them, then I have to get Human Ethics Committee approval. So an interview, to slightly over exaggerate, to just exaggerate it. So I want to interview you as part of a piece of research, and I have to give you, I read to you some words that basically are saying, Andy, thank you for being here. I want to interview you. You have the right to drop out anytime and tell me you don't want to continue the interview. Here, please, would you sign this piece of paper? Or I'm going to pause there. We're online. I'm recording this. Your continued presence is acknowledgement that you're willing to proceed with the interview. The Human Ethics Committee requires me to go through those hoops and jump over a series of hurdles. If I want to do an online survey, I have to give people the right to stop the survey at any point, which isn't difficult. I just turn off.
Yeah.
Am I able to use any of the data they've already entered? Well, that's a moot point. But an article for the journal, if there are issues like if you're talking to people or measuring the things that people do, strictly speaking, there should be some ethics approval for that. And that's a problem that I'm trying to address at the moment. That I know I've done the research in this area. The Human Ethics Committee in the university can't help with looking at pieces of applied research that has nothing to do with the university, other than we're hoping it'll get published in the journal. But there is an organization that if you give them a few $100s, they will have a look at your ethics arrangements and tell you, yes, it's okay, or no, you need to include these safeguards. And I think it's an extremely important question. And I know where the origins of a lot of this lay, is with the problems in Auckland Women's Hospital in the 1980s, the problems to do with research, which you can use the word to describe. Here's a woman presenting with this sort of condition. We can either treat it or just leave it and see what happens next. And some of those women who were not treated and just wait and see what happens developed cervical cancer and died. That was obviously unethical. Offline, I could describe it more forthrightly than that.
Yeah.
So there would be ethical things about this machine needed guarding, and I decided that I would see how much work people could do without the guard or with the guard. No,
Don't do that.
it's illegal and grossly unethical. So, yeah, as chief editor, I've got that bridge to cross still, but and I might well reject some research that said, well, with or without the guard, how much work did people do? No, I'm not publishing that.
Yeah, and I think from another point of view, if people are considering publishing articles or writing an article with you, I think engaging with you as early as possible would be really important in that piece, because whether you publish it or not that's relevant. But if people are doing the try this without a guard, try it with a guard, we really don't want that to be happening. I mean, that's whether we're publishing or not. It's like, no, don't do that. No. There are other methodologies that we could use to help you find the outcomes of that. Have you got anything to ask about ethics, Des? Because it's a big. I know it's another issue that you're quite involved in and passionate about.
Well, yes, kind of indirectly. I mean, the article that you wrote covers a broad range of topics and considerations that an author needs to take into account. So you've got things like ethics, conflicts of interest, bias, funding. There's quite a broad scope. But where can an author turn to get some further assistance?
The first stop might well be me. And there have been a number of times now when somebody has emailed me and asked if they can talk on the phone, and we have a conversation. I'm interested in doing this, or this is a piece of work I did. Can we have a conversation about ethics, conflicts, and so on? And I mean, conflict of interest. Who funded this? And there was one person I was talking to who said, well, actually the manufacturer paid for it. Well, it doesn't matter how nice you think the manufacturer was and how carefully you tried to avoid being skewed in your judgment about whether the manufacturer's product was good or not. There's a definite conflict of interest in that, and we didn't nothing happened after that. There was nothing sent to me as a draft. So you think there would be, I think, a fair number of times when a manufacturer needs to get a new product out into the marketplace and hopes for an endorsement from somebody. And they would love to have an article published in the journal saying, rah, 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 this new product really worked nicely. But it was paid for by the manufacturer. So where do you get the advice? Start with me. There might well be other people I can direct you to. Institute of Safety Management, go and look at the Code of Conduct. Or I'm also a member of IOSH, and I can point at the Code of Conduct for IOSH members. There's one piece of work I'm doing with somebody who finished their master's a couple of years ago to do with the ethics of the research they did. And it emerged partway through the research project that there was an exposure of that person as a student to a conflict between health and safety practitioner and a duty under Section 45B in the Act. And they were carrying out what I hadn't realized until we were talking about it one day. It was action research. And this is all loaded with all sorts of ethical problems. At what point do you say to somebody, as a practitioner, I think you should stop that, but as a researcher, you need to know what else is going on here. So start with me, and I'll hope to have some articles around ethics by the end of 2025, and some better guidance than me waffling on in this interview. Next question.
Just jump in there. Des, are you inspired to write an article on ethics there?
I am actually. You read my thoughts. Absolutely.
Yeah. I would really welcome people coming in with issues to do with ethics as you have found them, and that'd be great.
Fantastic. So, we've touched on a lot of different aspects, and there's a lot of barriers to getting an article published. We talked about ethics. We talked about conflicts of interest. We talked about meeting the journal's publishing requirements. How would an author stay motivated to work through all of these things?
Well, slightly tongue-in-cheek, don't read the article about writing an article, because at the end of it, how long it had taken me to get it to that point of, and it was a week. It took a week of my time to write that article. And that was mostly because I kept going back, trying to make it in plain English and simplify, and then where I'm sitting at the moment, I can point over my shoulder. My wife is my chief editor, as in copy editing, proofreading. And she went through it a couple of times and improved my English. And then I had to do another rewrite. So accept that if you're going to write, for the kudos and the long-term benefits to you and your career, it's going to take a bit of time. If you want to put together 4,000, 6,000 words, it will be the better part of a week of your time, which is why we always try and give plenty of notice. 2 or 3 months ahead of the next edition, send out a call for papers. And some people will have something part written as a report to the chief executive or whatever, and they can turn that into something worthwhile.
No, that's cool. Are there any? I'm just moving on, I guess, a little bit from that. When you're putting out the call for articles, are there any? Are you noticing any themes? So, is there certain things that are becoming prevalent that maybe several years ago, if you'd started this, I would imagine the journal would have looked quite different 7 or 8 years ago than it would now. And are there any fields that you're really hanging out for articles in? Is there anything? I mean, putting your biases to one side.
Oh yeah, yes. If I say I'm chief editor, I'd love there to be articles, 2 or 3 articles at a time, from other professional bodies that are within the HASANZ fold. So the safety engineers, the nurses, occupational health, occupational hygienists, the ergonomists. Everybody's got a story of some sort to tell, whether it's a case study or a piece of research. And while it looks like the pattern will be, the first edition in a year would be around April the 28th, International Workers' Memorial Day, which is about people who got killed at work or who died because of work. And there may be something about suicides because of work. The middle of the year might be, for some of the professional bodies, it might be the biennial conference, the years when HASANZ doesn't have a conference, and trying to get them to come along. And then the final edition in the year, well, in the year when there's a HASANZ conference, that goes into the November edition. But in each of them, there's an opportunity to put in articles that are nothing to do with that particular topic, that particular source. And it is all about expanding the pool of knowledge. So somebody who's an ergonomist might write a case study about something where there was a great result. And shades of the government that we have at the moment, it was not only a great result, but it improved productivity, and the employer, the PCBU, made more money. That would actually be a really, really good article, something that shows workers weren't being killed or injured and there was more profit. And it was in that sequence. So those sorts of articles will always be extremely welcome. Where do I think it might be in 7 or 8 years' time? Well, for a start, if my plans work out, I won't be the chief editor, I will have retired. And I hope somebody else will have taken over and be driving it as they see it. I think in 7 or 8 years' time, we may well have got a journal that is internationally known, and we're regularly getting articles about health and safety practice in other countries. And those sorts of articles will really be like a really good can opener to open up thinking in New Zealand. We may not be able to go and do overseas experience and bring it back to New Zealand, but if we can read about what somebody else has done in Australia or the UK or South Africa or wherever, then that might just click somebody's thought processes here and say, well, actually, my problem isn't quite that, but that's a really good idea. And that would make me smile greatly if I knew that was happening.
Oh, that would be really cool. That would be really cool. That would be really cool. Over to you, Des?
Yeah, look, it's normally around this part of the interview, I'd like to ask you what some practical takeaways might be from your article, but I firmly believe that the whole article is just full of practical takeaways. But I will ask, what's one piece of advice you'd give someone submitting their first manuscript to the journal?
Phone me up, first of all. I will always, whether it's daytime, nighttime, or weekends, I'll make time to have a conversation and help somebody to begin to get all those fluffy things brought together and turned into a sketch. And once you've got a sketch and you begin to see how you can tell a story, and so that you can start at the beginning of the story and work through to the end, and you can make it a really good news story. This improved some aspect of work health and safety, and everybody ended up chuffed, really, really pleased. Or it didn't quite work out as intended, and these are the reasons why not. And those sorts of stories, it's well accepted internationally that research reports that tell why something didn't work out the way it was hoped are just as valuable as those that tell something that really did work and that was a really good news story. And I, as chief editor, I want to hear all of those sort of stories. So start with a phone call to me, get some ideas, send me a sketch, and I can give you some pointers, and then you come back with the words, and probably along that journey find somebody who is a good proof editor.
Yeah.
Proof editors, my wife included, they're gold dust, a really good proof editor.
Well, that's brilliant and very comforting to know that people can reach out and know that they've got your support. So, Chris, a big thank you to you for your contribution today and for your article in the New Zealand Journal of Health and Safety Practice. Thanks also to my co-host, Andy Evans. If you're interested in hearing more from authors of articles in the New Zealand Journal of Health and Safety Practice, please follow along, like and subscribe. But otherwise, I'll say thank you. Have a good day.